The Temple of Space is a really interesting space, but there's many things we don't know about it. In this video, I'll be going more deeply into what we do know about it, and I'll also discuss some things that are interesting or mysterious. I hope you enjoy! Who is Asmoday? Before we go into the Temple of Space, let's first go into who made this temple to begin with. This is one of the four shades, namely Asmoday, also known as the Shade of Space. But to most players, she might be better known as the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, the god that separated Lumine and Ether. Interestingly, it appears that Traveler, but especially Paimon, are not aware that these gods are the same person. There are several times where Paimon implies that the creator of the Temple of Space could not be the same god that separated Traveler and their sibling. This is probably caused by the fact that there's a large discrepancy between how the people inside the temple view Asmoday versus how Traveler would feel about them. On one side you have reverence, and on the other side resentment. It's not clear if, unlike Paimon, Traveler does realize it, but there's definitely a disconnect being made between two different figures that are actually the same person. But what's also being made apparent is that Asmoday no longer resides over the Temple of Space, and instead left it in charge of two of her creations, Melanta and Nihilita. Melanta has taken over the task that she would normally perform in the space, while Nihilita seems to have abandoned the domain altogether, as we can find him in Tevat as a boss. However, if we look at the teaser, The God's Limits, that was posted last year, we find that Asmoday did not return to the other three shades either. To put it simply, we do not know anything about Asmoday's whereabouts, and you could say that she has gone missing. Istaroth even remarks that Asmoday is loyal to a new master now, but who this master is or why she seems to have vanished is not clear at all. What is the Temple of Space? Now that I've told you about the creator, let's actually dive into what the Temple of Space is and why it exists. The reason it exists is to preserve the history of lost civilizations or certain groups. When exploring the area, it very much gives the feel of a museum with small exhibitions showing off artifacts from certain regions. There are several sub-areas that have architecture that are reminiscent of certain areas in Tevat. There's an area based on Sumeru Desert, one that looks a lot like Chenyu Vale, and there are small elements of other regions too. You'll also find a lot of different kinds of Mora chests, all from different regions. So, to put it simply, it's a preservatory of different things from Tevat. When talking to an NPC called Historia, he actually says that Asmoday's sisters, who can be assumed to be Ronova, Istaroth, and Niberius, are the ones who actually turned the area into the museum-like place it is now. While Asmoday's only goal was to preserve certain histories, the other three shades stored various trinkets there. It can be assumed that they are the ones who placed the small elements I mentioned earlier in the area. Although it's not entirely confirmed which parts are by Asmoday and which parts are from the others, I believe it's primarily the relic display cases that are likely the things from the other three shades. For example, I found ones containing a printing press from Fontaine, a sword and musical instruments from Lemuria, woven scrolls from the Masters of the Nightwind, and there's a few more. It seems like the area you first enter after coming to the Temple of Space is also made by them, because it has many statues and vases on display. Some of these examples also have signposts in front of them describing what it is, and in one of these signs, Historia has added that he has no idea who placed the signs there, which in my eyes implies it was at least not Asmoday. Regardless, it seems that the Temple of Space is a collaboration between the four shades. Something I also noticed is that there are a lot of references to real life. That's not necessarily a new thing in Genshin, but I felt that it was so much more explicit here. I'm sure there are things I missed, but I'll discuss 3 references to real-life painters I found. Firstly, there's a reference to Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night painting. The sky in this area looks very similar to the painting, and the description says, technically speaking, what he painted was not the starry sky. This ties into post-impressionism, an art movement that focuses on illustrating emotional and symbolic impressions rather than realistic depictions of what is seen. The Starry Night is considered as part of post-impressionism. Second, when you ask an NPC who can be found in the desert pavilion named Vitruvius about his era, he says that he performed the calculations for the golden ratio for the human figure in fine arts, which became known as the Vitruvian form. That's a direct reference to the famous drawing by Da Vinci titled Vitruvian Man. Leonardo da Vinci actually based this drawing on an architect named Vitruvius, who has the same name as the NPC. The NPC also states that people who saw this work thought it was based on his own body, which made them question why he did not look the same as the drawing. That little misunderstanding is a reference to the origins of Da Vinci's work. And lastly, the mysterious NPC Escher. Although the lore of this NPC is a whole nother thing, this character is also a reference to the painter Maurits Cornelius Escher. Even the nickname Mauki is a reference to a nickname Escher had in real life, which is Mauk. In-game, some other NPCs refer to Escher's paintings as unsettling and confusing. This is a reference to the real-life Escher paintings and drawings, which are often optical illusions and constructions that trick your mind using shadows and perspective. Escher's work includes a lot of illustrations of buildings with impossible constructions, which definitely has a lot to do with space. If Genshin's Escher's paintings are anything like those works, it does make sense why Melanta viewed those paintings as blasphemous to the god of space. Although I've only mentioned painters, there are many references to authors as well. Different art forms are also reflected in the areas around the map, with Mahaifa Pulia Chamber being dedicated to literature, Luyang Academy to painting or visual art, and the Desert Pavilion to architecture and sculpture. It could just be because the arts are very closely linked to human history and culture, but I wonder if there's another reason for these references. Another important author in the Temple of Space is the author for the book Vera's Melancholy. This book has been in the game for a very long time, but the last chapter can only be found in Mahaifa. However, there are actually two versions of the ending. One is written by the author himself, while the other is written by Raumhilda, one of the Uplifted. In any case, both versions were written within the Temple of Space, because the author of the book was trapped in the Cage of Suchness. This meant that he was never able to publish the ending, and the people in Teyvat don't have access to it whatsoever. I think the reason the author was trapped here is tied to the contents of the book. The book continuously mentions the place Delphi, which is actually a real place in Enkanomiya. It's possible that Asmoday, or possibly Melanta, viewed his portrayal to be wrong and objected to blurring the boundaries between reality and fiction, something Melanta is quite adamant about. This has to do with the rules of the Temple of Space, which entail that the space should only be used for preservation and progress is not allowed. Since Calcerius, Okikuni, and Yu Zhangji wrote their own endings or other iterations of books about real-life events, they got punished for this. That's why I think something similar happened to the author of Vera's Melancholy. The book itself also contains many elements of traveling to different worlds, which the main character wants to do due to her boredom in her own world. Perhaps these ideas are something Asmoday opposes as the sustainer of heavenly principles. Also, speaking of the Cage of Suchness, there is also a cage that belonged to our sibling. This means that the sibling also spent time in the Temple of Space, but what makes this especially mysterious is the fact that Melanta says, "Why would you choose him and abandon me?" In this phrase, the pronoun actually changes based on which sibling you picked, implying that Asmoday picked the traveler's sibling over her own creation. This is reminiscent again of Istaroth's words about Asmoday's new master. Could it be that this master is the Abyss sibling? If this is the case, that would mean that Asmodee is also rebelling against her own creators, the heavenly principles. Many things that the Abyss sibling is trying to achieve, like recreating Conria, go against the heavenly principles. So why would Asmodee want to work for someone like that? Life in the Temple of Space. I already briefly mentioned some people of the Temple of Space, but I'll go more deeply into that now. Similarly to all the other artifacts and things to be found, there are also people who represent different civilizations and eras as, quote, living memories. It's not clear why these specific people were chosen to be uplifted into the Temple of Space, but none of them seem particularly opposed to it either. When the people get taken to the Temple of Space, they first have to go through the apathic interval. Here, the so-called uplifted must first give up their wants and desires, and practically anything that ties them to the human realm. Since in the quest the Temple of Space is referred to as Paradise, while the apathic interval part of the quest is referred to as Hell, it kind of reminds me of a sort of purgatory. It's a final cleanse that the people have to go through before entering Paradise, which involves letting go of worldly desires. The references to Paradise don't seem to be entirely metaphorical, as the uplifted who live in space seem to view it as such too. To them, Asmodee is a god in the same way that Barbados is a god for Mondstadt. Either way, the people in the space also don't seem to age or have any other needs, like hunger, thirst, or the need to sleep. Death also does not exist in the space at all. Even though this makes it seem free, there are still some rules to follow. The Temple of Space is dedicated to preservation, and thus progress is not allowed. I mentioned that some people in the Temple of Space got punished for breaking the rules by writing their own books or defying the laws of space. In my view, this lack of progress ties together well with melancholy and nihilism, which are the terms Melanta and Nihilita's names are based on. After all, the philosophy of nihilism is that the world and life itself are utterly pointless. That also means that the uplifted may have a pointless life. This is actually something the people there don't go along with, to Melanta's dismay. Historia even directly opposes nihilistic ideas. Even if life is inherently meaningless, we should still choose to live it. So even if evolution and progress is not allowed in the Temple of Space, the uplifted did not lose their humanity. It can be said that progress and meaning making are inherent to humans, which is why these things can't be suppressed, even by gods. Melanta's rules and punishments are viewed as tyranny by many of the uplifted. One of these uplifted is Raumhilda, who was the sister of Zeitlint. These two characters seem to be closely linked to the Temple of Space, and everyone seems to know them. Raumhilda believed that Melanta's punishments were unjust, and that's why she wanted to face off with him. But in order to gain an audience with Melanta, one has to give up their memories to open a path to the Atrium of Suchness. Even though there is not much information about Raumhilda, we can actually get an insight about her feelings in a different way, her ending to Vera's melancholy. As I mentioned before, there are two endings to Vera's melancholy. One version is written by the actual author, and the other is written by Raumhilda, who disagreed with the ending. The official ending is, in my view, what the game labels as Volume 11, while Volume 12 is Raumhilda's version. This is because Volume 12 mirrors what Zeitlint told us about her life. In Volume 11, the main characters stop adventuring, and the ending, to me, feels like kind of giving up or accepting life as is, almost like they no longer want to progress in life. Volume 11 ends with a character named Ike yelling, "I love you all," while Volume 12 argues that those are only words and that they should be proven. But what connects Volume 12 to Hilda more than anything is that it describes Vera and Sachi as being engaged. Even though they are soon to be married, Ike tells Sachi that they need him to save the world. This is almost exactly what happened with Hilda's own fiancé. Zeitlint tells us that he left Hilda to save the world. What Zeitlint says about this also mirrors the book. She says, well, the world's still turning. So maybe, somewhere out there, in a place no one noticed, he really did save the world. While in the book it says, since the world had not ended today, it meant that somewhere in a corner of the universe, her friends had succeeded. They must have saved the world after all. Zeitlint also tells us that her sister was sent to the sanatorium in Winter's Peak because of the melancholy she felt when her fiancé left, and kept waiting for him before she got uplifted into the Temple of Space. So, it seems like Hilda wrote the alternative ending of Vera's melancholy about her own life. However, Hilda's actions show that the story does not end there, which ties into a quote from Historia. A person is a story in motion. It shouldn't end just because life does. Raumhilda believed that she had to stand up to Melanta, and thus was willing to give up her own memories for her friends. But that's not the only interesting thing about Raumhilda and Zeitlint, as they are also connected to Asmoday and Istaroth. In German, Raum means space, while Zeit means time, which is what those two shades are the gods of. This shows that there's some connection between the shades, which also shows in one of the loading screens in the Temple of Space. This loading screen says that the Temple of Space was not always in the sky, but it was connected to a temple in Arcadia where Istaroth was worshipped. But the temple for Istaroth eventually fell into ruin, while the Temple of Space remained in the sky. Since Arcadia is one of the civilizations preserved in the temple, it could be that this rift is the reason for Asmoday's preservation of history, preventing it from getting lost to time, just as the original temple fell into ruin with time. Interestingly, the Temple of Space is not influenced by the flow of time whatsoever. People do not age, people from many different eras of the world coexist within it. Historia also calls it an ontology of the past that has no future. So, Istaroth's presence cannot be felt in the Temple of Space, even though the two temples were connected in the past. So to conclude, there's a lot to say about the Temple of Space, but there's still a lot of mystery surrounding it as well. Asmodee is certainly a mysterious god, especially since she has been missing for many years, abandoning her domain and her creations Nihilita and Melanta. Istaroth and Asmodee also seem to be connected in some way, but I feel like the full extent of this connection is not clear yet. Either way, I hope I was able to do this extremely lore-filled space justice, and that you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought by leaving a like and a comment, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, bye bye!